So good evening. Thank you all for coming today. I'm going to talk to you about the genesis for this book and my research methods and why this book and this subject is timely. You'll see some of the images projected here on the screen, and it's going to run through them. I'm not going to talk directly about the images because I know that you can do two things at once, but it includes photographs, posters, illustration, montage, zines, and stills from moving image. So it's a rich selection of images that go into this book. There is much more material. I had to be selective. I had to work to deadlines. So, there's much more research to be done in this area. As a researcher, I situate myself at the intersection of politics and art with a focus on protest. From the spectacle of the demonstration to the quiet document of resistance. So I'm particularly interested, obviously, in recent government legislation, which is criminalizing protest. I would be, interested to see how that plays out. I've also done research in the archival research in here, which was a very inspiring archive to work with, and the National Archive, because that's where you find a lot of the political papers, such as the Edward Heath Archive, which yielded, rich information and documents, and also because they were all typed up at that time, those documents, they give you a sense of the atmosphere around these political decisions. So I've also included interviews with artists, photographers, musicians, and others who work in the cultural sector to understand how they viewed the referendum and to map the ways it has impacted on their work and their personal lives, because there's a lot of crossover between the two. And this book is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the number of people whose lives have been disrupted by this political cataclysm. The tentacles of Brexit and the political trajectory of the Conservative Party through from the Thatcher sell-off programme in the 1980s and subsequently austerity provided a framework and an inducement for leaving the European Union. The effect of this political rupture with our nearest neighbours reverberates through these testimonies in the book. There were many more people that I wanted to speak to. I wanted to feature more nurses, more truckers, things like that. It was quite difficult to get to the organisations, to arrange to meet with people and speak to people, and also to persuade them to speak about this subject, in particular the people who'd left the country because of it. I don't forget that the Prime Minister David Cameron said that a referendum on membership of the EU was vital because he claimed that that was what everyone was talking about, when really this discontent emanated from the right wing of the Conservative Party and the right-wing press. This is a story of chimeras, of sovereignty, of scores of new hospitals that are going to be built, and a notion of British exceptionalism. It's a story of protest in which images and slogans are the direct method of communication and engagement. These interventions show the different ways in which artists and photographers inflect their preoccupations and disagreements through portraits and views of the landscape, some using text and image, text and comment, while others use digital methods, graphic design, illustration, montage, and photo montage. All utilize social media to varying degrees, which truncates the journey from the studio to audience or spectator, and provides a swift retort to political comments and events. It's not that the museum or gallery is an ineffective sphere. It's, I really enjoy going to exhibitions and things, but these institutions plan their exhibition schedule years in advance. In my book, I've referenced quite a lot of press articles and recently published books. There is much vital social data that's been assembled now in academia, but this takes time to filter through. and some of it is quite difficult for those who aren't social scientists, to read. Exhibitions provide an important platform to discussion and debate, and programming for exhibitions is sometimes prescient in its review and its perspective. But in an era of populism, and I would argue that Brexit is Britain's version of populism, I don't think many of the people who voted for Brexit frequent such exhibitions. And this is where we are. Providing a review of the Brexit years entails a look at mendacity and the trompe-l'oeil of populism, in which a group of men and women behind the Leave campaigns were in the main from very privileged backgrounds in terms of their education, their property ownership and capital, and it was extraordinary to see how they aligned themselves with those who do not have much at all. Central to this strategy is the denigration of news sources and commentators who are not sympathetic to their cause. It's difficult to write about contemporary history because things have been changing really, on a weekly and monthly basis. And it's difficult to know which aspects to include and exclude when things move so quickly. And the governing party seeks to quash scrutiny and provoke disruption in all directions, very much as Trump did in America. And I knew that as I wrote this and selected social and political references, that events would move on. And so they have. The polls point to ever-increasing numbers of people who would support a policy to rejoin. The UK's demographic has shifted. And those people who were too young to vote in 2016, on the whole, espouse diversity and empathise with migrants. The art of protest can reshape and influence narratives in the media that rest on political messaging or falsehood. The art can at the very least provide a counterpoint and do so in a way that speaks to those who don't feel heard. Most of the artists included in the book can speak without fear or favour. But as I've noted, this freedom may be in peril if the government clips the wings of the Arts Council. But this is also about effective opposition to policy. When both major political parties, as Tony said they're not talking about Brexit, or when prompted to talk about it, I say they're going to make it work. This was an omerta, the name given to those in the mafia who remained silent and protected their own. Everywhere you looked, there are politicians saying, we'll make it work, or it's a rip-roaring success, or it's not the Brexit we wanted another one, you haven't delivered it. All these different sort of narratives sort of threading into it. The activist group led by donkeys adopted a strategy of repeating lies and broken promises back to the government. One of their projections filmed onto the White Cliffs of Dover quoted Dominic Raab's confession of ignorance in 2018. I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this, but we are particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing. The satire and political activism of Led by Donkeys and Cold War Steve have built a huge following on digital platforms. The image on the cover of my book was projected onto the White Cliffs of Dover on the day that Britain left the EU. These strategies and these interventions have formed an ad hoc opposition at a time when political parties are cowed. Like millions of others across the UK, I feel that the decision to leave the EU has been ruinous in economic terms across every industry, from publishing to farming, and for those who have made their lives here. Many EU citizens who worked here have left. The fetishism around the referendum and the argument that because it was a referendum, it may not be revisited, does not make any sense. It particularly does not make any sense for those who are rooted in work and family here. And as recounted in the book, the decision to stay has been complex and fraught with anxiety about their legal decision. The referendum forced people to take decisions they never thought they would have to face, such as whether to take British citizenship and whether their children should apply for citizenship of another country. But what of the art of protest around this political cataclysm? The Brexit collection in the LSE was a very good place to start. One of the extraordinary features of the posters and pamphlets from the first referendum on the European Common Market in 1975 is the resonance with the issues facing us now. The journeys of migrants, the price of food, managing food security throughout the world, war in the Middle East, and the cost and availability of oil. As some of the artists in the book have said, Brexit was a long time coming. The antipathy and sometimes eye-opening falsehoods about the EU's power over British life and legislation are writ large. The warnings in the 1970s encompassed the fate of ice cream, pints of beer, and sausages. This was the terrain terrorized by European regulations, apparently. Europe was characterized as a meddlesome overseer, eager to clip the wings of British sovereignty. So the language and the attitudes were entrenched and encouraged over the years by a very right-wing press owned by billionaires who do not live here. They visit Britain, but they live elsewhere, mostly for tax reasons. So the iconography and language of victimhood, so striking in the 2016 referendum, was there all along. And what the Leave campaign had to do was to tap into it. The 2016 posters, only some of which are reproduced in my book due to copyright reasons. I didn't feel able to go to the Leave campaign and negotiate with them about including the material in the book, lay bare the racism from some quarters and echo the tropes about EU regulations strangling British business and trampling on tradition. It's interesting to note that there was a skepticism from some corners of government in the 1970s about the claim that membership of the EEC in the 70s would encroach on British sovereignty. The document drawn up by the Foreign Office counters this opinion, and the civil servants pointed out that neither Germany nor France had lost sovereignty. Then there are the Thatcher years, when Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher presided over the sale of Britain's state-owned businesses and industries, such as British Rail and the water industry, the effects of which are sharply apparent today. Of the many strands running through this vote and the reasons behind it, there's a strong connection to the construction of the English identity or imaginary. Scotland voted to remain, as did Northern Ireland. Wales voted to leave, but many have changed their mind. And overall poll numbers point to an ever-increasing numbers who would vote to rejoin. Some of the images in the book focus on Britain's coastline and feature the gash that is so prominent, not just in this art and these documents of resistance, but also for those who would repel migrants and send those seeking a life here to another country. It's the White Cliffs of Dover, which conversely is held as a beacon of hope for migrants and the site of government attempts to stop migrants in their tracks. Vera Lynn's wartime song, The White Cliffs of Dover, features in this constellation of the English identity, in which nostalgia for World War II looms large, along with Shakespeare and the bucolic landscape of England. So there is this focus in the book on borders. The lazy analysis from government and Boris Johnson that somehow Brexit would not deliver a hard border between Ireland and the north of Ireland is examined. This meant looking into the artistic responses to Britain as an island, in which nostalgia and a fusion of history and identity couch the claims around sovereignty. The Union Jack, which is central to the promotion of government policies and determination to lock down the British identity, is seen in these images, notably in Cornelia Parker's film Flag, which is about a factory in Cardiff that makes the Union Jack. Elsewhere, the images of the southern coastline highlight the precarious feeling of being close to the edge and the crumbling of these emblematic short cliffs. Visit Kent, which is part of the government tourist authority, dubs the county the Garden of England and describes the cliffs in romantic terms. They are an official icon of Britain, and they have been a sign of hope and freedom for centuries. While artists tease and worry at this border and government attempts to close it to migrants, the UK Independence Party advocates for a border in the sea. And they've said we would stop the boats by erecting a nautical defence mechanism consisting of several movable floating barriers at sea, sufficient to deal with the numbers of people arriving. The design will be insurmountable and will not allow any hand or foothold. They will be placed exactly on the international border with French waters by means of nautical GPS. A mothership stationed 500 meters behind the barriers will control the positioning of the barriers using secure communications. It will control unmanned airborne vehicles, which will identify migrant boats, their course, and their projected international border crossing point. It will be registered under a flag of convenience to avoid it being on UK territory and to eliminate potential asylum claims. So there you have it. There's a whole new realm opening up there with the mothership. And it's, this use of the word mothership and flag of convenience enables the user to sidestep UK tax and law. So this art and this resistance push back against the rhetoric and in some cases mock and satirize the proponents of these policies. When I first started researching this book and interviewing people, there was this omerta, and I was told by some that it was over, done and dusted. But as Chris Gray points out in his blog, which is essential reading on Brexit, it's undone for many. It's not the right Brexit, it's been done wrongly, or to reference one of the main architects behind this flabby idea, Britain is in the grip of semi-socialist policies that threaten the very existence of Brexit. This takes us to the lies that have threaded through the Brexit years. The language, the wording, the lexicon, as illustrated by Simon Roberts' Brexit lexicon in the book, encompasses a dizzying array of words and terminology, reimagined for the gallery and then stretching across the floor of a substantial space. Outside of the gallery, Flying Leaps, set up by Adrian Burnham with Kennard Phillips, situates this visual protest in the street on billboards and posters. This placing of these works in public provides several functions. Flying Leaps makes these works available to buy on the website and makes works of art by well-known artists affordable to those who do not buy from galleries or auctions. And this positioning also broadens and changes the debate. This is essential given the nature of the British press, when the Daily Mail, the Telegraph newspapers, the Sunday Times, the Express and the Sun pushed Brexit, though support for it is wavering with some of those journalists on those papers. Populism sacrifices truth for the message. And here we see the way in which these artists, designers and photographers utilize language, humor, satire, for the irony is that populists, for all their bombast and ways of disruption, are very thin-skinned. They have a sledgehammer as their tool and a very similar toolbox, which encompasses a rollback of rights and denigrating and refusing migrants. So these works are markers. They circulate in a range of spaces, from the local library to the billboard, on posters and in the gallery. Only a cut in funding would affect the latter, or timidity on the part of curators. But I'm heartened to see exhibitions in the Barbican with Resistors and the upcoming exhibition at Tate, Women in Revolt, Art and Activism in the UK, 1970 to 1990. So this is a record of a certain time. And despite some telling me that Britain cannot seek to rejoin the EU again, I reject this as a notion. Any political decision may be revisited and revised. These images may change minds, disrupt a narrative, provide an alternative view, inspire contemplation, or a sharp retort. This book illustrates the range of strategies surrounding the creation of images and their circulation. At the root of this is a determination to exhibit and engage in the public sphere. And this book joins a growing chorus of those who have not felt heard and who seek to work again with 27 developed economies on our doorstep. And if you wonder why it's important to speak up now, Nigel Farage has said that he will be Prime Minister of Britain by 2026. Thank you.